Isn't that
Some
wild?
issue that happened.
I was thinking about that. I was like, that's pretty crazy with our schedules and all this stuff going
Oh
on,
man.
to only have had that happen one time.
Mm-hmm.
And it's funny, dude. I don't know if you've gone back and watched the Facebook deal,
Can you see it happening?
bro. So like I'm getting these text messages in and I'm trying to figure out what's going on. My phone's blowing up. I'm getting these text messages in. And then I'm trying to communicate to you and listen to
Oh,
what you're saying and still contribute. Like there's several
that's so
times I'm
funny.
like, I don't even know where we're at. I don't know what we're saying. I'm freaking out. Oh
I'm
my
like,
word.
getting da 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 da. Isn't that true? And you're like,
Is
did you
what
say
true?
something? Did you say something?
Is what true? I don't even know what we're talking about. Oh my goodness. It was an interesting day for sure. So we'll share a little bit about that. I'm probably not going to share a lot, but we'll at least talk about it.
Yeah.
All right, let me get my stuff rolling here. We'll edit this. Hopefully we have people on today because we we haven't been
We skipped a
on.
week.
Yeah.
There was a post from Kurt Bollinger.
Bollinger. Yeah, he used to
Yeah.
go to church here.
It said, so he did a deal here. He's going to get some time on, our pre-podcast show. So read that.
I'm getting the deal real quick. Hold on just a second.
Oh, okay.
I had to edit the deal.
All right.
All right, let me save that real quick here. Come on, baby. Come on.
Come on. Help me out here.
Come on, man. It's taking a minute. Let's go. There we go. Still saving.
Good night. What's the deal?
Still saving.
What is the deal?
I don't even know.
It said probably been circulating, but sharing from a family member via screenshot. You see it?
Hold on. It's still saying saving.
What is the deal? Is Facebook still? Is it up on there?
Yeah, I was editing the description.
Oh, it says we're live now. Yeah.
Goodness gracious! All right, I'm gonna jump out of that. Let me go back into it. Sorry.
Yeah. Who cares? Just leave it what it is. It's just Facebook. It'll be right. It'll be right on the podcast description.
Right. They made some changes, and so I think it's kind of affected some of those kinds of things. You know what I'm saying?
I do.
Let's try one more time. We'll try one more time. If it doesn't save, I'm done, Ken. I'm just done with it.
Hey,
Ain't got time for this.
We got.
I think we're getting there.
Poor Michael Hanks. He jumps on at 7 o'clock in the morning.
I know, man. That dude, he's a vampire. He don't sleep. That dude don't sleep. He got awakened by the almond farmers.
The shaking of there's a mighty shaking.
The shaking of the trees woke him up. My God, that'll preach. Okay. Are you showing it? Did it pull up for you?
What?
On Facebook?
Yeah.
Oh, there it is. Okay, there we go.
I've shared it at all kind of places.
Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Did Ford get it today?
Oh, yeah.
I love that. It's one of my favorite things is that you share it to Ford.
I even share it to a here's somebody's private wedding group. There's like a wedding planning deal. I share it to them. Amazing. They've been married for 2 years, but hey, If you still got a wedding group and you didn't get rid of it, you're getting it shared
Yeah,
to you, buddy.
absolutely. You deserve that for sure.
Yeah. Yep.
For sure.
Crowding
let me
up
try.
all my stuff.
Trying to find the feed on Twitter here so I can give it a little retweet. Tweet and retweet. There we go. That's out there. All right.
Yesterday, my wife said, she said, I think I just heard your phone ding. I said, if your phone dings, I said, if the verb conjugation for ring, your phone rings, you say it ring, rang, rung.
Right.
I said, but if you say your phone ding, she's like, I'm just saying, this is why English is such a hard language to learn.
It's such a hard language to learn. I think something's happening. I mean, we've not ever had like a great filter, but like the older we get, my wife.
Well, here's the thing. Could you imagine somebody from, let's say, I don't know, Korea or something, they're learning English and whatever. And and they'll say like, that they've learned, my phone, right? My phone rang. Right.
Yeah.
And then, but if it was a text message, they'd say my phone dang. And it's like, no, that's not the right word.
That's not how that works. That's so funny.
It's a hard language to learn. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, it's just a hard language to learn. Yeah. Well, I was preaching Sunday, so we have a family text group, and my phone, my phone danged. Is that what I'm supposed to say? Did it?
Most of the time, my text messages are just dung.
And so the text message was, I can't believe he just said that. So that's become a common thing. Just is what it is. Oh man.
They created
John Hummel.
ROFL.
John Hummel. He said this is getting jacked up. I said that in a session there, and they didn't. Somebody didn't know what that meant, so that was funny.
Is that legal?
Is that legal? And the description that somebody gave was, like you jack up a car, whatever. So it's like lifting it up.
Yeah.
So the person said, Brother Dillingham jacked us up today. He lifted us up.
Amen.
Bless God.
That's what I'm talking about.
Redeeming the terms.
Praise God.
Redeeming the terms. Oh man. Hey, while we're getting ready to get on, and so while we're doing that, people, if you don't mind, hit the share button for us, would you? Would you hit the share button for us? Because
people are afraid to do that right now.
Well, and yeah, for real, we're gonna get under control. We got a beautiful view of my brother's, a close-up view of his microphone. I mean,
there's a microphone we've been using.
It's this demonstration. Now, after we've been off, we were off last week for General Conference. We aborted mission the week before, and so we just got to get back on track. You know what I'm saying? Got to get back on track.
That was a wild deal.
It was a wild deal. It was a wild deal.
I just got a message that says, make your streams top notch with royalty-free music tracks.
My God. There you go. And just like that, he's back. All right. We ready to roll, bro?
3, 2, 1.
10:19. That's not bad. Oh, man. There was no beer conversation or hot dogs, so we're off to a good start.
No, right? This is sanctified.
Sanctified, my God. All right. You ready? Here we go. 3, 2, 1. We gotta get the numbers up. We need people to jump on. Come on, man. Come on. People, come on. All right. Focus, Dillingham. Focus.
Look, you're talking about focus. It's like my man needs. He's
got double vision. He's got double vision.
It's like I'm having such a hard time focusing. I'm going to put on both pair of glasses.
That's so awesome. Oh, man. Oh, my goodness. All right. I never should have said focus.
I look like a young Harry Carey.
Hey, everybody.
Take
Oh,
her
my
out
goodness.
to the ball game.
Oh, man. Humble just said, time to go take an ADHD quiz. All right.
I was at where were we at? It might have been Dayton Dragons. And they were singing "Take Me Out to the Ballpark," seventh inning stretch and all that.
Yeah.
And I said, root for the, and I just was like, Cubbies. And like everybody's like,
what? What's he doing?
Guy? I'm like, come on.
Come on, man.
That's the real words in the song.
You can't change. Did you see they did the hologram of Harry Carey this year?
No.
Singing it? Oh, dude, it's bad to the bone, man.
Well, that's probably where those Q people got the hologram of the Pope and the hologram of
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Like all these people.
Go check it out. Harry.
I mean, if Harry Carey could be dead and still be singing the famous seventh inning "Take Me Out to the Ballpark" through hologram, then maybe all these dead world leaders that these people are telling us about are hologramming messages. Who knows?
That'd be a good podcast. We need to do a podcast. That'd be a good one.
When conspiracy theories erode people's confidence in your faith.
My. All right. Are we ready now? We got that out of our system? No. We're focused.
Double
focused.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. All right, here we go. Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham, alongside my big brother, Ken Dillingham, Jr. the Third, who is he's double focused today, folks. He's locked in, double focused, double vision. He's got it all
blessing.
Today. Oh,
double blessing.
He got it
what?
Today.
Sometimes when sometimes when you really want to lock in on a topic, you just got to double focus. I want to be double blessed.
Double portion. My God. Hey,
double portion.
So we appreciate everybody being on today. It's been kind of an interesting couple weeks. So 2 weeks ago, we had a first on the Mobilized Church Podcast. It's pretty hilarious. It's pretty hilarious. If you go back and watch it, it's really pretty funny because we've never had this happen before, but had some issues here at the church, kind of an urgent situation that popped up in the middle of our podcast that demanded my attention immediately. And it's pretty funny to watch 2 guys with ADD getting messages and trying to communicate. Bro, literally, I have no idea what I said or if it was in line with anything you said, because I wasn't hearing anything that you said. It's
I could
tell, man.
I was trying to figure out what you were trying to figure out. We were literally speaking subconsciously. There was not one conscious statement made in the entire podcast.
Crazy. But we made it through, and it was actually pretty coherent, all things considered. And so we aborted mission. Here's what's funny is so the whole podcast, I think, is 30 minutes, but 20 minutes of that was just shenanigans.
I know.
Tomfoolery.
I know. We would have had a full podcast if we had just dove in.
Absolutely. We'd have gone right in. So I've used the word shenanigans and tomfoolery already. It's going to be a great day. So I am turning 50, so I'm busting out the old man words right now.
Right.
So we had that, and then last week, I was at General Conference. You abandoned me. You bailed on me. Didn't go to General Conference. Appreciate that very much.
Abandoned ship.
Unbelievable. So it was a great conference, tremendous General Conference, and bro. So here's what's amazing. Real quick before we get into our topic. So some amazing messages preached at General Conference. And here's what was amazing was literally, so I was only there for a couple days and busted out, but the days that I was there and then what I heard in the messages afterwards, the focus of everything was the mission. Everything was the mission. Our good buddy Joel Urshan, who pastors in Cincinnati, did a great job at Great Lakes Youth Convention. He's just a beast, dude. He's just a beast.
He's learned. He's really learned how to preach over the last few years.
Yeah, he's going to get there one of these days. If he keeps working at it, he's going to get there. But he preached a tremendous message about bearing the fruit of the Spirit, which was basically what he preached was the importance of being the disciple. Doesn't matter what you do if you're not the disciple, and letting Jesus change what you care about. Like he just preached that thing. It was so good. And then Tim Gaddy preached the next day or the next night and preached multiplication. He preached about multiplication. It's in our DNA. It's the seed that's in us. Bro, it was so good. And so we are working right now to get Tim Gaddy on the Mobilized Church podcast. So how cool is that?
Somebody. He'll be good. What's amazing is everybody's talking about, man, all these messages on mission and multiplication and, whatever. How bad would you feel if you were the one guy who preached on, let's do something like
let's just hold on for a minute.
Let's hold the fort until Jesus comes and
right.
Whatever. Wouldn't that be sad? You'd be like,
that didn't have to change his sermon up real quick.
Yeah. He's like, there was a day when I thought we should hold the fort and just hold on to truth, but I've changed my mind.
Exactly.
In the last 30 minutes.
Yeah, for real. And one of the things I came away with was like, man, it's awesome. I'm glad we're having the conversation. Now the conversation needs to be, okay, let's get our minds focused on that. The question then becomes, how do we do it?
That's where somebody even mentioned and said, part of our group said, if I'd have, one of the pastors that we coach, said, if I hadn't been connected to you guys, and this group, then I would have gone away from General Conference inspired and frustrated.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's where the challenge is. I think we know that it's there. We know multiplication is there for us, but how do we get there? And that's what we want to help. That's what we want to help with. We've got an amazing Mobilized Church network, great pastors, over 20 pastors right now that are part of the network on the journey to be multiplication disciple makers. So just throw a little plug out there. Yeah. If you're interested in more information, we'd love to connect with you and talk to you about that. And God is building a great movement. There's a kind of like this groundswell of energy and excitement going towards multiplication. So,
and we're working. And the thing about it is, I think it's important to note too, is we've actually tried to limit the number of people simply because of our bandwidth and our ability to make an influence, with them and because the culture shift is huge. And the culture shift has to come from value shift. And value shift is one of the hardest. That really, honestly, a value shift is one of the hardest things you can do because values are so pervasive into places that it's like, is this a value that I really developed biblically and accurately? Is this a kingdom worldview? Is this really, or is this just a methodology I fell in love with that? And so because of the fact that it's so difficult sometimes to make that kind of a value, not a value shift, but the paradigm shift that's necessary for the cultural transition, we've really limited the people that we invest in. And we're trying to think through and work through how we can open that up more. And we're working through that.
The Dan Grider principle, more time with fewer people produces greater results, right?
Exactly.
So that's what our focus is on, is just how can we invest in not just the masses, but the right people and the right number of people. So we do appreciate the prayers. We don't feel like that obviously we don't feel like we have the answers, but we do feel like we've been on the journey. We want to help share because there is a spirit-led movement that is taking place right now that we know that God has put in us, this calling and this ability to multiply. And so we're on the journey. We're going to figure it out. That's the bottom line. I've made up my mind, man. We're going to figure it out. We're going to keep plugging away until we get there. And God is going to do it for sure. So you ready to get started, Ken?
I'm so ready.
10 minutes of this wasn't tomfoolery. This was just, so it's going to be fire today.
Let's go.
So last week we started a conversation, and again, I hate that I had to abandon ship in the middle of it because it was going to be a great conversation. So we're going to kind of continue that discussion because we really, literally barely even scratched the surface of the discussion conversation. And so Andy Crouch wrote a book called Culture Making, right? Culture Making.
Yep.
And in that book, he discussed 4 ways Christians typically have responded to culture. And the result of that has kind of been the result of that has been culture wars, this kind of battle of culture wars. So why don't you get us started, Ken, and just set that conversation up, and then we want to dive into these 4 ways that we've responded to culture, not necessarily from the standpoint of like what's right or wrong, and I don't want to steal your thunder, but basically what he says is like this is just kind of his evaluation of the last 100 years about the way the church has responded to culture, and there's certain components of that. There's some good, there's some things we need to learn from, need to grow from. And so why don't you just kind of set up a little bit about what he says about culture making?
Well, I think that what is the other book to mention too that he wrote that is so notable is the book Strong and Weak. And basically in that book, he sort of discusses that in God's economy, all authority is postured, established in vulnerability. That God's authority doesn't work outside of vulnerability, and so it's an amazing book as well, which is kind of a discipleship type orientation. With this the concept that he brings to light in that book, and then some of the I don't know if last week we put the link. He had a short, like 9 or 10 minute video that he did, where he kind of, if you wanted to watch and dive in it. But anyway, what he does is he talks about that the church has had these 4 predominant approaches at the way that they interact with, or that they understand or respond to culture. And basically what he talks about is the first way is that they criticize it. And by saying criticize, meaning to that they I don't know, that the idea, or I'm sorry, condemn. What am I talking about? Condemn the culture.
Yeah.
So they start by condemning the culture, and then they criticize the culture or critique it, and then they copy it, and then eventually they end up consuming it. And I like what he taught. I like one of the things that he said. He said, I don't think that any of these 4 things in and of themselves should be the church's posture. He said, I think that it should be gestures, that in other words, we should be able to do all 4 of those things based upon our ability to make a sort of a biblically sound assessment about what it is that the culture's doing or saying, or whatever the component is. And so I like how, he talked about the fact that one approach, when he says condemning the culture, one approach is to just simply say all things that secular culture does is bad.
Yeah.
That all things are, man, it's just all not God, it's not kingdom, that it's of the world, and so it shouldn't. We should have nothing to do with it. Then another generation came along, and he kind of spoke about these things sort of generationally. The next generation came along and said, well, is it all bad? Can't we figure out what the bad is and what the not bad is? And not that they wanted to be worldly, but that they felt like that the posture of simply just whole cloth condemning everything that the culture that the world does is bad and wrong is really not nuanced enough for people who have the ability to think and to process things based upon and evaluate things based on biblical concepts. And he said, and so this is the generation that came along, and the condemning generation said, he said, we shouldn't go to the movies. But then another generation came along and said, well, are all movies bad? And so they said, this is his example. And he said, so then they came along and said, well, then what we can do is let's just go in and let's critique the movies and let's find out where did they have biblical worldview and where were they off base, and be able to make those kinds of evaluations. And he said, then the next generation came along and copied it. And I love how he used the example in this about the that was easy. And he talked about how that the guy had the shirt on that said, Jesus, instead of the easy button, it was the Jesus button, and that the idea is to simply take those things that are clearly identifiable in culture and sort of just remove the cultural element of it and just overlay the Christian perspective of it. And I've even seen, like, for example, like shirts, people have had like the shirts that said, instead of like Budweiser, it said Godweiser. And like, you know what I'm saying? Just, and so he talked about that they end up copying, thinking that they're,
or taking secular songs and putting Christian lyrics.
Yeah.
Right?
and just sort of just copying it because, well, why would you do that? So the thought is like, why would you do that? Well, because, maybe because it's got a lot of, it has a lot of cultural traction. In other words, it's something extremely popular. It's very well known or whatever. Well, let's just take the popularity of that and put a Jesus theme onto it. And maybe we could have a gospel conversation with somebody because we're putting a Jesus theme on top of a worldly theme, or secular music. Like, well, kids want to listen to, kids are wanting to listen to pop music. And so let's just make Christian music sound like pop music so that they're not listening to pop music, but they're getting sort of like a happy medium replacement, our kids can't go to prom, so let's do prom for them. It's just not going to be prom. It's going to be like a prom replacement. And so it's like a copy culture thing. And then the last was consuming it. And he said, in this last place is where people just sort of sit there. And he used the example. He said they sit there with the remote, and he said they're not condemning anything. They're not criticizing anything. They're not even copying anything. They're just there saying, I wonder what's on tonight. And they're clicking through, just consuming whatever the culture's putting out.
So good. And this is, I think this is a podcast episode that we're going to challenge people to kind of put your spiritual thinking caps on and really kind of work through this, because it's easy. It'd be easy to kind of just, fall in one category or swing either way on the pendulum. And as you talk through these things, Ken, you can see elements of each that are valuable.
Exactly. Right.
So like, there are elements of the culture that absolutely violate the value system of the kingdom. And
we need to be able to condemn those.
We need to have like John the Baptist, lost his life because he condemned
Great point.
Something that violated the value system of the kingdom. And so obviously there's some places in that, but as you were talking there through, and you gave the example about movies, I was thinking about television. It wasn't just apostolic culture that condemned television. I mean, for many, many decades from the invention of the television on, there were a lot of movements that
Oh, yeah.
that condemned television. And as you were talking about that, I was thinking, so that phase from condemning to critiquing, really technology demanded that you couldn't just put a blanket statement on everything. Right?
Right.
And that was the conversation, I remember having the conversation with some of my mentors, about kind of like you said, the blanket statement about stuff. And like, well, okay, we're getting into a culture now where, you can't see it on the podcast, but I'm holding up my phone. You can have the same content or worse content on this that you would have if you went to a movie theater on a whatever 100-foot screen or whatever they are. I don't even know what they are, or an iPad or whatever. You can get all of that content. So a blanket condemnation would mean that you'd almost have to go back to like technology free.
Yeah.
You
No
I'm
phones,
I'm
no
not throwing
iPads.
shade, but like almost Amish, technology wise. So okay, so you can see how critiquing became a necessary thing of like, okay,
Mhm.
there's elements that you can get or whatever. You're going to have to learn how to filter through some of those things and
Mhm.
analyze that. And I love the statement that he made. He said the problem with that generation, and he went back 100 years and analyzed kind of the movement, the journey of how this has happened, how we've gotten to where we are today.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he said, the problem is there's a generation that thinks that critiquing or analyzing something changes something. And it doesn't change anything. It just
True.
helps you to become aware of it, right?
Yeah.
And so then you get into the copying thing. And so there's elements of good in all of it, right? And I
Mhm.
think about as a missionary goes into that land that he's called to reach, and they embrace certain aspects of the culture, right?
Yes.
So
Right.
we're in Malawi. We preached the General Conference of Malawi, and their worship was uniquely Malawian,
Very much
right?
so. Yeah.
It didn't look like it wasn't American worship. It was Malawi. They embraced aspects of their culture into that. And I think for us as Americans, that process has been more challenging. I don't know why.
Mhm.
Why do you think that is?
Well, because I think that there hasn't been a whole lot of these kind of discussions.
Yeah.
And I think in some ways, um, I think in some ways, people might could, um, and appropriately point out, well, your 4, I mean, it's not ours, but the 4 postures that you mentioned are all slides in the wrong direction. Like
Yeah.
in right in some people's
Yeah.
mind,
Right.
like, well, look where it ended. It
Yeah.
ended with consuming it. And this is
Yeah.
what
So good.
and right. And so I think that what happens is I think sometimes what happens is people sort of anchor to one of them and say, I'm not going any farther than this.
Yeah.
And this is what's interesting is because I don't think any of these 4 um not according to Andy Crouch, none of these 4 happen inside a person. They happen in a span of time generationally. And
Sure.
so I
Sure.
think that there are some people who look at it and say, do we really want that slide? And what we're saying is no. That's why we're talking about it. That's why we're saying, do we have the ability as disciples to have a biblical worldview enough that these can be gestures where we say, we know what we should condemn, we know what needs critiquing, saying, well, there's nothing wrong with this,
Yes.
but this is, like Jesus, I think Jesus critiqued it when he said, Jesus didn't condemn the culture. He just critiqued it when he said, you know, in the world, people who are leaders exercise lordship over others, but in my kingdom,
Yeah.
leaders will be servants of all. And I think that Jesus was able to sort of critique the culture and say, this is the way it happens in the world. That's the way they lead, but I'm going to show you a countercultural movement. So sometimes critiquing gives us the ability to be in the culture, but not of the culture. condemning doesn't always produce a sanctity of mind and heart.
Right.
Sometimes being able to critique actually causes you to have a more situated biblical worldview than to just simply say everything's bad, everything's wrong, and then all of a sudden you come to a place where the dissonance in your thinking says, to really actually be intellectually honest, to truly be intellectually honest, I have to admit that not everything is wrong.
Yeah.
Like you said, is it wrong to, like, so you come to it from a culture where they condemn owning a television, and then all of a sudden your kids get, iPhones and iPads and whatever. And you're like, well, the NBC app is on there.
Yeah.
And then what happens is the people who started with just they're just just boom, just mark an X through it, and we're not even going to go there. But then what happens is another generation comes along and says, well, like, I think you gave a good example there when you were talking about that. Another generation comes along and says, yeah, but tell me what's different about watching it on a 6-inch screen or a 60-inch screen, because it's the same content. Is it the medium that's evil, or is it?
Yeah.
And what
that was the
happens
discussion,
is,
right? That was the
right,
conversation.
and I think that's the thing that says, to actually have a generation that's able to have a truly situated biblical worldview requires you to be able to do like the critique piece.
Yeah. And Andy Crouch made, his statement was there was a time where Christians were more known for what they were against than what they were for. And again, in an element, and as we become increasingly secular, there are more things that mandate a stance and a position that are, and so, for example, the whole situation about the therapy for minors to change their gender.
Right.
That's criminal. That's absolutely abominable.
Right.
And so there's some of those elements, and there is the often the propensity or the tendency to kind of lean that way, where we become, there's a lot of angst about the direction of the culture, and I think what you said is so true. Like kind of the fear, right, of where does this lead? Where if we don't make a statement, if we don't stand strong on this, then where is that ultimately going to lead to, and whatever. And so, and then so I think the key is this, Ken. I think we have to have these conversations. We have to talk about these things in a healthy way, not in an unhealthy way or a dysfunctional way.
Right.
Because if we stifle conversation, then what ends up happening is you leave people kind of to their own devices. They're trying to figure things out on themselves. And there are dangers in each of these areas. There are significant dangers that can come, right? If you're not willing to condemn things that are clearly against biblical values, there's a danger there. But there's also a danger if you become so like the ought defenders, and all you ever do is condemn everything and blanket everything.
Right.
There's challenge there. Critique. Obviously, we need to be able to filter through some of the things like you talked about. Is it the content or is it the medium? Well, let's critique that and analyze that. But there's also a danger of people that become critical, or people that use their own their own impure desires to justify things that they don't want to do or that they want to do, right? And so there's dangers in all of this, and this is why. So why are we talking about this? Because all of this is a discipleship conversation. As a disciple, a follower of Jesus, we have to have the ability to engage people, and it starts with us. How do we walk through this process? And how do we engage people in our culture? Because if all they ever hear us do is condemning or critiquing or whatever, is there an appeal to that? But if, like, one of the statements Andy Crouch makes is, the copying thing, that there's no, like, you don't see Jesus doing that. Jesus didn't become part of them in yes, I know he ate with publicans and sinners, but he didn't engage in their immoral behavior to win them. That's not what Jesus did. And so this is, I think, a much needed conversation, because we have to learn how to navigate this from a place of intellectual honesty, right? What is the goal behind this? Is the goal really that we want to be like Jesus? We want to please the Lord. We want to be his representatives in this world. Is the motivation fear? Is the motivation carnal desire? All of that kind of stuff. And so I want you to address that real quick. One thing I want to say, Furman Vasquez made a comment on, he said our worship music is almost 100% American culture. And I do agree with that. Obviously there's cultural influence in there. One of the things I was kind of referencing was the Malawian type of worship, not necessarily their music was definitely Malawian. Sure. But their worship style embraced a lot of their culture. We don't often know how to do that.
Let me say it like this. I was thinking when you said that, I thought, man, there's a lot to unpack there, Chris. A lot of what we would in America would call choreographed dancing.
Yeah.
They did in worship.
Right.
I mean, they did like a line dance thing.
Yeah, like a Congo line thing.
And they did, and it was like their worship atmosphere, and like it was with the, they're like, there were certain moves and gestures that went with them,
Yeah.
It was not like, it wasn't like we've created a little bit sort of, like for example, in some of the Pentecostal movements or whatever, we've created like, well, if it's really a spirit thing, it's going to be very discombobulated and just sort of arms flailing and whatever. And it's
no choreograph at all.
Right. Don't make it look like a dance move. Just make it look like that the spirit has a hold of you and you have uncontrollable, gyrations or something. I don't, whatever you want to call it, whatever. And so, and I think that's the thing where we are almost idiots. It's on our podcast.
You should demonstrate that one more time, bro.
Such a dingbat. And so, but the thing about it is I think that is important is to say, it is to say that in some ways, the mindset, that's a great example of like, I do think what we could say is when we say, okay, so what happens with in certain situations where, like in American culture, where you bring in cultural influences from, say, Jamaica, or you bring in cultural influences and it's in America and they're Americans, you know what I mean? And so I think it's so important for us to really, like you're talking about, to be able to recognize some of this and to say, like for example, when I evangelized, one of the things that had been sort of really popular, a mindset was when the Spirit of God would move, people would say, they would be like, I believe that was in the flesh.
Yeah.
Right. That was like this old, like people would take off and they would shout and they would, whatever, or they would have like a, the spirit moment or whatever. And they're like, I don't know, but I think that was in the flesh. And I'm like, and so I just started everywhere I preached. I just said, look, David was a man after God's own heart, and he danced with all of his might, and there was no Holy Ghost then. So explain to me what's wrong with dancing in your flesh.
Ooh, boy.
Praise the Lord with all. Praise the Lord with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Praise the Lord with your body. What is wrong with me using, you know what I'm saying? What's wrong with me just using my physical capacities to just, there was a song, we were singing on Sunday, you know, that song, dry bones come out of that grave. And I
Yeah.
mean, bro, and I was just feeling it, bro. And I realized this one time, like I was like jumping, I had my hand in the air and I was like, "Dun, dun," and I was like spinning in circles while I was doing it. It wasn't that I was in that moment like, oh, the spirit was producing that reaction. It was me wanting to
Yeah.
just engage with the atmosphere and say, mighty God, yes, come on,
Yeah.
Lord. You know what I'm saying? And
Yeah.
so anyway, so but that is an example of saying, okay, but there was a generation that wanted to condemn dancing. And so
All of it.
right. So their idea was, if we don't dance at the dances, then when we bless God dance at church, it better be the spirit, which is
Yeah.
not even a biblical concept.
Right. Right. Absolutely.
Like a whole
Absolutely.
generation, because they didn't, because a whole generation wanted to hold on to their condemnation of a particular activity, sort of overlaid that condemnation instead of being able to critique it and say, not, you know, we're not, no, we're in church.
Yeah.
The songs are worshiping God. The praise is going to him. We're not at a high school dance. So
Right.
we shouldn't have to worry about, nobody's going to do the waltz in the altar or the, you know, the
Yeah.
flamingo or whatever, you know. So I just think this is an example where, you know, over time, and there's probably people like, you know, wanting to give me a thump on the noggin right now for, you know, for even talking about this type of
Thump
thing.
on the noggin.
50 and over statements.
That's what I'm
So,
saying. Bunch of tomfoolery going on around here.
so, but let me throw this at you, because I think what we're talking about here, and we were talking about wanting to dive into it just a little deeper, but it's interesting because the last thing that you said that I think is worthy of the conversation is that when we're not able, and I'm going to tell you something right now. What I found is that sometimes when I find people in the consuming stage and they're not able to condemn, they're not able to critique, they're not able to, you know, copy what's copyable. And you say, what
Yeah.
do you mean by copy? What is there anything that we should be able to copy? Well, I think we should be able to copy, you know, the way that, like for example, the way you go to work and you have somebody comes to church and they have, you know, have administrative skills and they come to church and say, hey, let me just
Absolutely.
use what I learned at work.
We do copy a bunch of cultural things.
Right.
Whether we know it or not, we absolutely copy a bunch of things, and we implement, you know, some principles culturally, biblical principles that are applied culturally, you know,
Well,
distinction of
okay,
dress, all those
dude,
kinds of things. I mean,
that's actually, and that's a great point that you make, because I'll tackle one right here that could
yeah.
really, really be incendiary in
Oh
some way.
boy, here we go.
And that is, there's a lot of churches that are putting like cafes and coffee areas and stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah.
There are some people that the only response that they're capable is condemning that.
Sure.
That shouldn't be in the church, bless God.
Right.
Okay. All right. So then the question is, okay, what is your posture of that? Well, we're just copying, or we're just, and so what I could say is, yeah, we are. But here's the thing that I want you to understand: we are copying. Maybe you say, let's say, you know, well, so why would you try to put a Starbucks in your church, or why would you try to? There's like, that's not what we're trying to do. What we're doing is we're copying the connectivity element. we're connecting when people walk in, and that and like a coffee shop, and having some, some pastries to offer, and people walk in, and they can walk in and get a coffee, and they get a pastry, and people stand around, and there's a connection that happens. And
Community,
that's why
right?
people that's community. That's why people go to coffee shops and they sit around and they do their
Absolutely.
homework at a coffee shop. Why would you do that? Because it's a cultural identifier of a sense of community
Absolutely.
and whatever. So here's where you got to go into the critique stage. So you go, so once you're at a stage, you need to be able to go up to the stage above it. Man,
Yeah.
and I'm just doing this on the fly, Bubba. So if I'm wrong, stop me real quick. But I think if there's something that you're copying and there's a question about that, then you should be able to go to the stage above it and say, okay, well, let's critique it.
Yeah.
Can we do this in such a way we're not trying to make money? Bro, our cafe doesn't make money.
No, right.
At all. I mean,
Right.
it's not there for revenue.
Yeah.
And so there's and so the cost is basically we're just providing people the ability to come a little earlier instead of
Sure.
walking through the door. Okay, so let's be honest. Okay, so would you rather us not have anything, walk through the door, come in, and come to service 3 minutes before church time, not connect with anybody, come straight to their seat, sit down, not say hi, and have a disconnected worship service and go home and not feel like they connected with anybody that whole day? Would you rather have that so that your sense of we shouldn't have a coffee shop in the church is upheld?
Right.
And so that's
Right.
what I'm saying is we should be able to go up to the next level and critique it. If we can't critique it and say, if it doesn't pass the critique test, then we need to put it into the condemn category.
Yeah.
But here's what I find. People that are at like the consume stage, or people that, if you say, well, let's critique that, they begin to immediately defend their consumerism. And now we know we have a problem.
Now we know we've got an issue. Absolutely, 100%. And I think, if we're being honest, how many times have we heard the statement about some of these kinds of things we're talking about? The statement is, yeah, but I know where that ends up. Right?
Yeah.
Oh
right.
man, I know where that leads. I know where that, and you open that door up, you start having a coffee shop, and then the next thing you know, like you're letting down on all the beliefs and values of the kingdom, right?
Yes.
And so obviously, again, one of the things, I've talked about the pendulum ad nauseum, the pendulum theory, but one of the things that God's really been dealing with me about is those polar opposite ends. It's that tension between the two that keeps things in balance, that it'll keep things in perfectly in balance if you'll allow it. And so, yes, there needs, like exactly what you're saying, is you need to have the ability to go up to have from a true disciple perspective, look at things and have a conversation, have a discussion, be able to look at it. The big term several years ago was like, man, as Christians, we've not been critical thinkers. We've got to be critical thinkers. We got to learn how to be critical thinkers. And we placed overvalue on that. And that got us into some trouble and some things.
Yeah.
And so people look at some of that kind of stuff and they say, well, if you allow this, we know where that's going to end up. So what does wisdom say? Wisdom says you need to be cognizant of the fact that there are some potential pitfalls that you may not be aware of. Right. And so you evaluate those things, you look at those things. But I refuse to allow somebody's misuse of something that is neutral, or something like if it goes through the critique phase and a cafe, there's nothing.
You're like, yeah, it's just neutral.
There's nothing immoral. It's a neutral thing and whatever. And somebody says, yeah, but I know where that ends up. And, you get a casual relationship with God. Okay, now you're operating out of a place of just complete fear, and right, and that's not the posture of a disciple of Jesus, is doing stuff out of fear. Wisdom, absolutely. Evaluation, absolutely. But at the end of the day, being able to have I think extracting some of that emotion away, right? And I think you set it up perfectly, where it becomes so very personal to us. Yes. That we have an inability to have real conversations about this kind of stuff, because we view it through a lens, and that fear gets that emotions all hyped up. And then they go, oh man, I know where he's headed. I know where she's going. They're going to end up here and blah, blah, blah. And we've got to be able to have these conversations. And I know as we're having this discussion right now, there are people probably going to listen to this and they're gonna be like, oh man, I know where those guys are going. I know where they're headed. No,
Sure.
that's not what we're saying. If it's biblical, if it's absolutely 100% kingdom value, or if there's a biblical principle that we can take and apply, right? If there was a biblical principle that we'd take and apply and say, well, that's not something you should do, then 100% we need to be cognizant of that and aware of that. And what we're saying is, and this is what Andy Crouch is basically saying, is these postures, if out of balance, what it produces is it produces a cultural war. It produces an us against them kind of mentality.
Sure. Yeah.
And that's not what Jesus did. That's not how he didn't go in and make himself just like copy the culture completely and whatever, but he embraced aspects and elements and used that as ways to communicate the value system of the kingdom, right? You've heard it said this, but I'm telling you blah 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 blah. Over and over again, he used that illustration. You've heard it this, but I'm saying this. What was he doing? He was using their culture to instruct them on the value system of the kingdom. And I think because we've swung so far on the pendulum on this thing back and forth that it's difficult sometimes to come to the center and have a real productive conversation about these kinds of issues.
Yeah. And I think what you're saying there is we have to be able to view these things as gestures to employ, not postures to stand on. Because,
yeah, I like that.
Because what was like, why should you be able to employ all of these as gestures? Because we have to know, how do we interact with the culture?
Yeah.
It's not there's nothing biblical about when Peter said, come out from among them, or I'm sorry, save yourself from this untoward generation. He wasn't saying don't have anything to do with them, or he wasn't, let me say it like this. I don't think Peter was saying don't have anything to do with the culture. I think what Peter was saying was saying save yourself from the untoward culture.
Yeah.
Understand that culture's untoward. Understand what it is. I think, like, just for example, going back to the having a coffee shop in the church thing, or critiquing it or whatever, I think that people could say, well, next thing you know, they're going to have their coffee in the sanctuary, and and we're going to have a mediocre view of the sanctuary and the place where the presence of God meets with us and whatever. And so then the thing is to say, okay, so are you saying that not having food and drink in the sanctuary produces a respect for the sanctuary? No, it may not produce that at all. It's just simply that it's not there.
Yeah.
You have to be proactive about producing respect for the sanctuary.
Sure.
And so if you're proactive about producing respect for the sanctuary, then you don't have to put a sign on the door.
Right.
And so anyway, I had
absolutely, bro.
100%. You understand what I'm saying? It's like, just because it's not happening doesn't mean that the thing that you think should happening automatically by osmosis happens.
Right. And if there is something like that we need to do, then let's not swing so far on the pendulum, right? So, like the example about media on your phones, the example is not to abolish everything and whatever. The answer is, okay, so how do we navigate through this? How do we get the right filters? And ultimately, what does it reveal? Exactly what you're saying. What does it reveal? If somebody wants to find that junk, they're going to find it, whether it's in a magazine, on a movie, in a movie theater, on their phone, on their iPad, whatever. They're going to, so what we've got to do is we got to find ways to help people put the right things in place to make sure that exactly what you said. It's not necessarily going to produce what you think it's going to produce, but again, I'm not going to allow the potential misuse of something limit my ability to appreciate something that's completely neutral.
So good. I had a conversation. This is so funny. I had a conversation with a guy. This has been some time ago, but we were talking a little bit about some of the places where the church. He had come from a denominational background, and he was talking about. He said, "It's just funny to me." And we were talking about the conversation. Honestly, the conversation was about the use of media. The conversation was about people really pitching a fit about where they felt like the United Pentecostal Church said okay, they approve television now. And so there's this whole group that went off and they started their own deal, and they started, and basically became defined by like this one issue, like, well, we're going to hold the line on that, buddy. And so anyway, we were having this conversation, and if somebody's listening to this podcast, you don't know what I'm talking about, good for you. But anyway, Doc, this guy, it was very interesting. He'd come from a denominational church. He said, in the church that I came from, he said there was stained glass windows that had depictions of Jesus and scriptures and Bibles and flaming hearts and and people and like Jesus holding a lamb, and there was all of this pictorial where everything that you saw and everywhere you looked was had a biblical connotation. He said there weren't drums, there weren't electric guitars, we had a pipe organ. And he said, it wasn't till I came to your church that I heard drums and electric guitars and no religious imagery, no cross. And he says, it's just interesting that sometimes Pentecostal people sort of went as far as they wanted to go. And he said, and like some of the position in some of the denominational churches is we're not going to allow rock and roll instruments into our church. We're not going to allow, Chris, he said, and he had done a study on this. This is so crazy. He said that there was actually a movement that started the Church of Christ vocal music. And part of this movement was a result of churches beginning to put pipe organs in the church. Do you know why? You know why that was a problem? Because it was copying the theater. The only place where they had organs in this kind of a format was at theaters. And so the church put pipe organs in, and buddy, there were people that freaked out because they were copying the theater. And they were bringing the world into the church by putting pipe organs in. Well, then they stopped right there. And then all of a sudden, these churches had electric guitars and drums and all of this stuff. And they were like, no, that's letting the world into that's, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
So
absolutely.
I think it's just really interesting. Right? Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so some people might be wondering, like, why this conversation? Why are we talking about this? I think it's so important from our own personal discipleship standpoint, right? Are our positions driven out of a reflex against the culture and against the world, or is it driven out of true biblical stance? And so for us to first be the disciple, and then secondly, to engage people in our world, is like you said, is our posture, just we're against everything, and that's the position we come from. I got a text message yesterday from one of our churches, one of our Mobilized Church Network churches, and we're talking about somebody in their church has somebody who's disciplable, and they're working with them. And the person asked the question, they said, do you think cussing is a sin? Right? Well, so if your approach, if you don't have a disciple making approach and a discipleship view, your immediate response is absolutely, you need to stop cussing. Right? But from a discipleship perspective, so this person was asking, like, how do you navigate this conversation, whatever? And I said, my follow-up would have been, he said, so the comment was made, I feel like I need to stop cussing. And so my follow-up question would have been, well, why do you feel like you need to stop cussing? What about your relationship with God makes you feel like you need to stop cussing? Obviously, I have a position that I think that the things that come out of your mouth are a reflection of what's in your heart. And I think what comes out of your mouth has impact on people's lives. So I don't think that we should say things that again violate the value system of the kingdom. But what he needed in that moment was not just a condemnation that, yes, bless God, if you're going to be a Christian, you need to stop your cussing. What he needed was the conviction of the Lord that says, I want to be like Jesus. And if this is something that violates the value system of the kingdom and Jesus wants to show me a better way, then I want to embrace that into my life. And so I think this conversation is so and it's, bro, it bleeds into every area of our lives.
Yes.
And real quick, I want to address just real quick. Sharon makes a comment. It's interesting about the television issue, about people's trust, being in a breach of trust when you're dogmatic about something and then you change your position, it breaches trust. And this is again why I think this conversation is so critical, and I think it's so important. I've said for a long time.
That's a good comment to tackle, I think.
Yeah. When you make something, when you condemn something, it may come from a really good place. It may come from a really good reason of why we've condemned something, right? Exactly like all the things we've talked about today. Like there were really good reasons of why people condemn certain things. But when you elevate that to a place of the same level of very clear biblical positions, and then culture shifts and culture changes, and now all of a sudden you do have to adjust, you do have to adapt, right? And now you change. What ends up happening is when you do that, you're not elevating all of the biblical concepts and principles. You're actually bringing those things down. So if you have something, so say for example, like the television issue, and you're so dogmatic, no television, no television, no television, and then you have iPad, phone, whatever, and you're like, well, okay, it's okay. Now all of a sudden it causes people to question, well, what about the other things that you said you're so strong and so dogmatic about? And I do think that's an important conversation, don't you?
Yeah. Well, and absolutely. And I think it's important to be able to say, I used to make the statement before really, actually, I've been reading articles about, technology that was on its way and things like that. And I actually made the statement many years before, 20, 25 years ago, that technology is going to outpace our ability to prohibit and legislate holiness.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that's the thing. I think that's the thing that we say, that's where we have to be able to have the conversation to say, there was a day when I believe a prohibition was a logical posture.
Yeah.
But what happened was technology made the prohibition, the condemn approach, almost create an ancillary weakness.
Yeah.
Because there was a day. So here's the thing. If you take a position of prohibiting something, then you can prohibit a medium. But when more medium comes that you can't prohibit, then you have to enter into a new conversation. And I've been writing down. I've been writing down. I've been trying to think through so condemnation equals prohibition, critique equals, does it still please God?
Yeah.
And so I think this move, and I'm trying to think of a P for copy and a P for consume that is what the result is. So the result of the condemn posture is to prohibit something, and the result of critiquing something is to be able to say, does this really please God? What about this is aligned with Scripture? Like you just said about the guy saying, is cussing wrong? Well, the great discipleship question is, where is that coming from? No, is cussing a sin? And
Yeah.
so I love this discipleship question that says, well, let me ask you a question. Are you just concerned with not sinning, or is this a question of a desire to please God?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, and what
Right.
an amazing different kind of conversation. So, but I think this, I don't know what copy would be, the P, but you know what I'm saying?
One of
Like,
those would be produce, right? Because it's
that's
what
what
is
I
it
had.
producing?
That's what I had. And then the consume is is like consume. I put down peace. Like, in other words, does it still produce peace with the spirit in you? Do you still have peace with the conviction and the whatever, your convictions, right?
Yeah.
Sort of the peace principle, something. In other words, like, so for example, I'll give an example of that. So we went one time to an event. It was like a community deal. And we're walking around. It was a community deal. It was like a community, like a festival. And we're walking around, and I said to my wife, I said, I don't feel right. I don't know what the deal is. I still don't feel right about this. And I didn't have peace about it.
Yeah.
It was nothing wrong with it was,
I like that.
they
I
could
like
have,
that.
you could have, whether it's an apple butter thing or whether it's a corn festival thing or whatever, but you walk around, like, let's say example, like right now, let's say you have a deal where at this time of year, it could be some kind of like a fall festival thing. And you get there and you realize, man, there's a bunch of sort of demonic type looking things. And it's like, these people have actually turned this into sort of a Halloween festival more than like an Oktoberfest. And it's,
Right.
or you go there and it's like, oh man, I didn't know this is going to be, there's people just walking around with, beer and, half, soused and whatever. And so I think the consume is that peace element. And copy is that produce. What is it producing?
Yeah.
And so I
So
love,
good, man.
right. You tracking with me? So I'm just
Absolutely.
throwing this out, bro. I just really think that as we walk through, just like, uh, when the prohibition, when the medium could no longer be prohibited, then the posture of condemning it no longer produced what it was that we were wanting to produce. And that was righteousness and holiness and sanctification. And so then
Yes.
the question is, okay, now we're going to have to critique some things, because now people have not worried about content. They've just been taught and trained that not having something keeps you safe. And
Whew,
now,
that's so good, bro.
right. And now, because they've not really been taught to critique it, they've just been taught to prohibit it, to condemn it. So now it's been prohibited. Now we've got to teach people to say, does that really please God?
Yeah.
Is that really
Yeah.
pleasing God? And
Yeah.
so
What's it producing? Is there peace in it? Man, that's so good, bro. That's so
yeah,
good. I think this is I know this is a little heavier conversation about some of these kinds of things, but we need to be able to have these discussions about the world that we're living in, because we live in probably one of the most complex generations because of technology and the advancement, education, all of the. I mean, it's one of the most complex generations that our world has ever seen. And so exactly what you're saying, the condemnation thing, where in previous generations it has been effective in a lot of ways, and it's been,
sure.
it's produced a lot of very positive good things. There are still things that need to the clear condemnation about some of the things, lifestyle, confrontation with biblical values, all that kind of stuff. But it becomes more difficult in the more nuanced things,
Bro.
right? It becomes
Like
more
somebody says,
difficult.
don't eat cereal because we believe that milk is bad. And then all of a sudden they come out with almond milk, and somebody says, can we eat cereal?
Right.
because
Right.
now it's almond milk. It's not,
Right.
let's say, for example, like I'm just throwing something out. Let's say a kid was raised. I like to bring these up as type like examples and analogies because it kind of helps us take it away from sort of becoming ought defenders and being like, my God, what
Sure.
are these guys
Theory.
talking
Right. Right.
about?
Right. Right.
So let's say somebody was brought up in a home that were absolute vegetarians.
Yeah.
Absolute. And they're like, we don't eat meat. We don't eat eggs. We don't eat cheese. We don't eat milk. We consume nothing that comes from animals.
Right.
And then all of a sudden their kids come and let's say they're just radical about it. And you say, well, why would they be so radical? Well, maybe they had the last 3 generations of people died from some disease, cancer or whatever. So they just get ridiculously radical. And so they're just prohibit, right? Well, can we do it with moderation? Prohibit. Can we do it just a little bit sometimes? Prohibit. Can we just do it on my birthday? Prohibit.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Right.
And so what happens is all of a sudden they have almond milk and oat milk and soy milk, and they're like, that's plant-based. Can we eat cereal now? And they're like,
Now you're conflicted.
yeah.
Right. Now you're conflicted. Man, that's good stuff, bro. And I know there's no way in an hour podcast. Well, it's actually 10 minutes that we discussed a little bit last time before we abandoned mission. But there's no way we can, exhaustively address all of this and go through this. But hopefully what we've done today is at least gotten the conversation started. How do we engage our culture? How do we engage our world? How do we reach our world? I mean, all of these things are so vital and so critical. And I go back to, it begins with our own personal discipleship. And that's why these things are really important is what are the things that are being produced in our lives, in our own personal discipleship? What are they being produced by? And so, the truth is in previous generations, it's been difficult to have some of these conversations without feeling, like you're going to be judged, that you're going a certain direction, or, they're judging your motives or whatever. And in discipleship, one of the beautiful things I love about this journey of discipleship is the ability to have conversations about the difficult topics and working through these and learning how to personally navigate that, but then also how to engage people in our world in this process. So great conversation today, Ken. I appreciate you. Anything you want to wrap it up with?
No, I think that's that's perfect what you just said, because I think what happens is sometimes it's easy to stay in a posture if it's easy to stay in a posture if you're not missional.
Yeah.
It's way easier to never have to. It's cleaner. It's just easier if your church growth is basically births and transfers.
Yeah. Right. Right.
If your growth is just birth and transfers, then what happens is you don't have to tackle any of this. But the moment you start going missional, it's just like somebody's like, golly, I got to have this conversation I got to prove to this person who never read a Bible in their life is cussing a sin. And I've got to walk this person through. Man, if you're going to be missional, you're going to have to be able to employ all of these gestures and do it in a biblically sound, fundamentally sound way, in such a way that produces, here's the key, that this is the thing, having this conversation inside of an attractional model church, having this conversation inside a behavior modification culture, having this conversation in any other context is really hard to have.
Sure.
But when you have this conversation in a missional context, then it gives you the ability, Chris, to say, what is a disciple? A disciple is somebody that's willing to let Jesus change what they care about. If there's some things that you've just slid into consuming, then the discipleship conversation is, why do you have peace with that? Why are you at peace with that? And what and you start putting them in tension, and you start walking them through the process of saying, is that thing that you're allowing in your life, is that something that you should just consume and don't care? It's just, it's like, oh God have mercy. We always have to be, and the thing about it is, why does this frustrate you?
Right.
Why does this conversation frustrate you when I'm just asking you, do you believe that thing that you're allowing in your life pleases God?
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
so good, man. So good. And there's some great comments, great discussion. Jeffrey Glick just made a great post, our good buddy out in San Francisco area, and great comments, great conversation. And hopefully that's what these types of discussions do, is stir up more conversations, more discussions. Wish we had more time to dive into some of that stuff, Ken, some of the comments that come in. So we appreciate everybody being on today. We know schedule's been a little bit crazy the last couple of weeks, but we're locked in, we're loaded, getting ready. It's wedding week, bro. My
yes.
Reese dog, my son Reese, is getting married on Friday, and so we are on the countdown for that. But want to make sure we got in today. Appreciate everybody jumping on, being a part of the conversation, and we will come back to you next Tuesday, Ken. Next Tuesday, around 10 o'clock in the morning. We'll be sometime around there. We'll be here, so we look forward to coming back to you then. Until then, go live mobilized.